So welcome everyone. My name's Robert Peake, creator of Transatlantic Poetry, and tonight's reading is being hosted by George Wallace of the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association. And George joins us now from Walt Whitman's Birthplace on Long Island in New York. So George, are you there?
Robert Peake, how are you?
Good to see you.
You actually were part of the Walking with Whitman program here a few months ago. Hope you're well.
Oh, well, thank you, George. Good to see you.
Good. Well, it's my pleasure to, for the first time, host this transatlantic hookup from the Walt Whitman Birthplace in West Hills, Long Island, about 25 miles east of New York City. And for me, it's a special honor to be able to introduce to your listeners Gregory Pardlo, who's this year's Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry from Brooklyn, and Selina Nwulu, who's in London, and she's the young poet laureate of London. You'll be hearing more about each of them, more from each one of them. What we're going to be doing is hearing from Selina first. She'll be reading 15 or 20 minutes worth of her poetry, followed by Greg. Selina, London-based writer, poet, performer of Nigerian heritage. She's currently the Young Poet Laureate for London. That's this year, 2015 and 2016. Her work is an exploration of both the personal and political, which she weaves with themes of identity, daily observation, nostalgia, and belonging. Her work has been published in a variety of magazines, anthologies, including collections by the RSA, Lunar Poetry, Emma Press, that's last year. Her first chapbook collection, The Secrets I Let Slip, was published by Burning Eye Books in September of this year. I think she's going to be reading from that as well. She's also written for a number of outlets, including The Guardian, Red Pepper, the Free World Center, and Sable Lit Mag. Selina's performed nationally, internationally, most recently at a number of festivals, including Glastonbury, that's great, Edinburgh Fringe, Fiery Tongues Festival in, and I'll never get the pronunciation of this right, Rooigord, Holland. Please welcome and give your kind attention to Selina Nwulu. Welcome, Selina.
Hello, thank you, George. Thanks for that introduction. Okay, so I'm going to read a few of my poems. The first poem I thought I'd start with is a poem called Home is a Hostile Lover, which is very much thinking about climate injustice and displacement and identity, really. I was in Paris earlier this week with an environmental forum, and we were listening to talks and workshops by communities from the Global South, and it struck me more than ever that we need to be listening to a multitude of narratives and stories around climate change, and we need to feel their pain as starkly as we feel our own. So that's very much in my head at the moment, so I thought I'd start with this poem, which is called Home is a Hostile Lover. Remember when our delta waters were clean, how we washed our faces in rivers and chased fish with our bare hands. Remember, before delta had its throat slit and bled its oily pipes into soil, when we hummed words into water and it would laugh and sing back. Noose. We are burning alive in this village. The oil pipes spew open like bowels and stain our homeland with curses. Our mouths have become coated in oil, drops make liquid nooses around our necks, and our words buried and left for remains. We will never speak the same again. Eaten. Look how obese the ocean has become. The waves ingest my fertile and vicious, home to its bones. The ocean leaves its offcuts when sated, and I am left a half-lit emblem. Tell me, where does one turn to when their home becomes a hostile lover? Sinking. They're all sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. Our borders have become dense and long, and their ships have burst into splints. The sea is bloated with people's limbs. Their memories did not make it either. They're all sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. Watch how the bubbles float and pop. Funeral. Does my alarm clock wake me, or the nightmares? I often cannot tell. Both remind me of a lonely funeral. I share a room with strangers. We breathe in damp and each other's lungs. We are wheezers who will not complain. We are still sinking on dry land. Future. I work long to send money home, for they are sure of the future here. At home, everything is on quicksand, so we speak in the present tense, for home is an exposed nerve, waiting. I work long here, saving my money, hoping to send the future back home. Danger. You tell me to save the planet, to reduce my carbon footprint, buy local, and to turn my lights off. My footprints are not wanted here. I buy where you think I steal. I am afraid of what darkness might bring. You speak like I don't know danger. Okay. So now I'm going to read a few poems from my book, The Secrets I Let Slip, which came out in September, so it's still very new, still a brilliant novelty to me to have a book. This poem is called Jack in a Box, and it is after Simon Armitage, Not the Furniture Game. His hair is steel wool, and his eyes are metal marbles, and his stare is a rusty vice, and his nose is a used test tube, and his mouth is a drawbridge, and the gap between his teeth is a cave, and his words are bats escaping, and his tongue is a jungle, and laugh marbled meat, and his chin is coconut husk, and his neck is a faded oak tree, and his shoulders are weathered cliff edges, and his chest is a stained glass window, and his lungs are crushed roses, and his breath is a cobweb come winter, and his stomach is knotted rope, and his arms are ripped Bible pages, and his palms are coffee-stained apples, and his fingers are homeless, and his legs are burning matches, and his feet are train tracks, and his shadow is a blunt pencil, and his tears are chloroform, and his doubts are a lighthouse, and his intentions are 2-day-old flowers, and his smile is a dusty piano, and his heart is a jack-in-the-box. It has not yet opened. So the next poem I'm going to do is called Homecoming. I grew up in the north of England, in Yorkshire, and there was, growing up in Rotherham, this idea of home being Nigeria without really going there or knowing so much about it. And I think that, so the idea of home is quite powerful for me. And so this poem, Homecoming, is a kind of me reminiscing what it was like to go back to Nigeria, home, for the first time. And I guess it's in response to the saying, go back to where you come from. We're going home, she says, and I think at last. I'm tired of this town. Its stares never got used to me, and this place feels like a cold scowl. A plane hauls me from the monochrome and drops me into a whirlpool of Nigerian colour. I am hit by its everything. Airport lines of waiting, haggles, rhythms and smells. The heat wraps its legs around me, pees in the small of my back. I stick to the seat of the car before it throws me up and down, a yo-yo over potholes. The village, My village waits for me. With its arms like palm trees, they are waving for my homecoming. The language, my language, speaks in songs woven with echoes and blood ties. I am out of tune, its meaning ducking out of my hands. I am the mosquito's new fruit, a different taste in a familiar shape. They suck from me the authenticity my words cannot give. I am raw-bitten and grateful. Can I have this? Can I make this place my own? I say hello in Igbo to a face I should recognize. She cackles at my attempts. I have fallen between the gaps. I mourn this abyss between two hands and smell the red clay soil in the cracks of my palms. Welcome home, darling. So I guess thinking about home, I'm going to do a poem. Still thinking about home. I'm going to do a poem called The Mango Tree. Mother, you are cutting that mango with a chainsaw. Its teeth have left it with a coat of angry track marks, and yet it still remains a closed fist. You bought it too soon, ignored the insolence of its skin, thought you could soften its blunt and carve it a better name. The summer we flew back to your favourite mango tree, we found it as you'd left it, offspring overladen, branches benevolent and knowing. I ran to your stride as you retraced your footsteps and found yourself back in the ribcage of the tree. You shook its girth until the most sated of mangoes lost their will. Golden grenades surrounded our feet. You sliced the best one, like hot knife to butter, mango salivating juice down your fingers. You laughed as my eyes willed to taste. That laugh, as if fallen from the tree, luscious and oozing through blushed skin, full of fat pulp, glistening under sun, sweet on my lips. At the tree, and you spoke to me in Igbo and mango chief. For the here, you are a sigh life into this cold boulder. It stays prude and indifferent to the sharpness of the blade. I watch its anemic curls whizen into northern air. See how it leaves bitter secrets in the hollow of your mouth. I miss your laugh. So I'm going to do just a few more now. By kind of coincidence, this is about motherhood, so I guess connected to the poem I've just done. If I can find it, bear with me a second. So this poem is called Hollow. I can understand the importance of my mother's motherhood, and I have watched crowns placed upon those who have embraced the revered entrails of maternity, those who have draped it in softness and ample bosom. I understand. The truth is far too much beautiful tangle, too much bruise for the maternal platitudes we have inherited. I understand. But I am yet to hear anything else I can earn a crown for. And while I have no desire to be kept up at night, winded by the weight of sacrifice, indecision can weigh just as heavy, can cause just as many sleepless nights. A mother can become hollow, waiting and waiting for a second becoming, watching her daughter running in the opposite direction, the cycle of motherhood disintegrating, a triumph, a tragedy. So this is the second to last poem I will do. This is called Two Sides of a Coin. I suppose I've often wondered who I would be if my parents had stayed in Nigeria. So I guess this is me kind of reflecting on that, and this is called Two Sides of a Coin. There is a girl who looks like me, walking through the streets of Lagos. She is freshly plucked mangoes and forehead. She is flat shoes and a head wrap on Sundays. She is a collision of patterns chasing each other. She looks like me, but her vowel sounds have shrunk. No Yorkshire undertone here. Speaks in half songs, rolls Igbo off her tongue like blooming hibiscus, and wears her ancestors' sayings on her chest like armour. She weaves through this fluid choreography, the joke thrown to a passing neighbour, the pause and smell of the pile of peppers in the market. Each act has a home in this moving composition. You can see her belonging in the sway of her hips. If you look closely enough, you can see how her shoulders sigh like mine, can hear her life in the drag of her flat feet and feel their tendency to wonder. We both laugh with the weight and depth of a church bell. On a good day, it will throw our heads back. Sometimes I see these two versions of myself like two sides of a coin, heads here, tails over there. I wonder why the coin landed on this side. I wonder which version would have laughed the most. And this is a small poem that I'll do to finish. This is kind of a part two to my other poem, Homecoming. So it's Homecoming Part 2, and it goes like this. Exiled into each other, we declare ourselves as found countries. We map borders in the lines of each other's hands before migrating to their arms to map memory on muscle, trace nations through veins, and find refuge in the creak of their elbow. Thank you.
Thank you. You were listening to Selina Nwulu. That was beautiful, Selina. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is George Wallace. I'm broadcasting from the Walt Whitman Birthplace in West Hills, New York, on behalf of Transatlantic Poetry and Robert Peake. I'm glad you could join us. Now we'll turn to our second feature for today. That would be Gregory Pardlo. Gregory Pardlo is the 2015 Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry. He lives in Brooklyn. His collection Digest, through Four Ways Books, was the recipient of the Pulitzer Prize this year. Digest was also shortlisted for the 2015 NAACP Image Award and is a current finalist for the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. His other honors include fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, New York Foundation for the Arts, and his first collection, Totem, was selected by Brenda Hillman for the APR Honigman Prize in 2007. Pardlo's poems, reviews, and translations have been widely published and are noted for their language simultaneously urban and highbrow. Snapshots of a life that is so specific it becomes universal. Please welcome Gregory Pardlo.
Hello. So thank you for having me. Selina, that was fantastic. I hope I'm going to assume that you can still hear me. This is an interesting project, a bit of a leap of faith. I have to trust that there are humans on the other side of this box. I guess it's going to test my imagination, my powers of imagination. It's really thrilling, actually, to get to read with Selina. I'm not sure to what extent this was all planned, but there's an interesting kind of diasporic thing that I hope will happen in addition to the Transatlantic. I'm going to start, since Selina read some poems about home, I'm going to start with my poem about my current home, which is Brooklyn, a place I have grown to love quite deeply. This is called Marginalia, and it has an epigraph from Robert Hayden. Sing the Union cause, sing us, the poor, the marginal. You should know, by the way, that Brooklyn is hardly poor or marginal these days. Preamble. Note the confection of your body salt on the breeze, the corn silk sky, Olmsted's signature archways and meadows, kite strings tensing the load of a saddle-backed wind. This is Prospect Park, Brooklyn, where limbs tickle and jounce as if ice cubes shiver along the shirt sleeves of evergreens. Pond water whispers, and the echoes of Yankee fifes linger in wind and in the shirring jazz hands of leaves. And those shirts, the skins, the human retinue converging on the uneven playing fields. The African drum and dance circle sways the pignut tree into a charismatic trance as Orthodox women walk powerfully by, jogging shoes blinking beneath the billows of their skirts. Children rollerblading, trailing tzitzits. Take heart in the percussion structuring the distance like prophetic weather, a shelter of vibrations. The last conga note, a bolt tapped into the day's door frame, and you are no less, no more home here than in the corridors you return to in your dreams. Illusory, altogether babble fractured, a single word from you might bring the verdant funhouse down. Listen like a safecracker. Navigate the intricate ruptures by ear, the Latin patois of picnickers, the Slavic tongues of lovers, replacing your mouth with self-conscious silence. You are Caliban and Crusoe, perpetual stranger with a fork in the socket of life's livid grid, stunned and bewildered at the frank intrusion of the mosquito on the hairless back of your hand. You are stranded at the limit, extremity and restriction, jealous for that elusive, the domestic. Yes, you're thinking not the brick and mortar, but the quickening backfill of belonging, the stranger facing, the neighbor knowing confidence and ease with the ripple that diminishes as it extends over the vast potential of immovable thirst. You are home now, outsider, for what that's worth. I spent some time in my early adulthood in Copenhagen, so I thought I'd share that with you. Copenhagen, 1991. As adversaries, we made good lovers, made heat where there was little to hold in common but youth and wanderlust, until I found her with a former Valentine reclining under skyrockets of wilted mistletoe, where the Yuletide ebbed and old lang syne wheezed away on chariots of snow. My buckling knees upturned a crate of clementines, which drummed a stumble-hearted rhythm across the snow-crusted cobbles to her feet. Yellow gloves to my elbows in the suds at Spieselauten, an eatery for hippies and bikers from Pusher Street, who tipped me with blocks of hash. The waitress first palmed the bits of sintered brick like deposit slips at the window where I had cried, "Klar!" then shuffled trays of pint glasses and flatware in water blued by sanitizing tablets, and I waved a latex thanks to the flame-haired socialists who toasted me as they toasted the chefs as well. Like a cat on pine needles, I danced the waitress out to smoke a chillum with the piano man, much of an hour. Who could interrupt stunning a parked window with her pout, soothing wrinkles from her apron? Damp flame with a burnt Prince light behind my ear, I began to mimic liquid and the moment's departure, like crowds ungathering, the waitress leading me kittenish and heart-starved across cold cobble in the raw-boned motif of a morning. I was the only chirping, songlets and the eking moon, throat bells keening. I moved toward her mouth. "Stuffed tiger," she said. "I'll carry you home in my teeth." So I was really interested to hear Selina talk and read poems about in kind of support of the environmental, the work, all the work yet to be done in service of environmental justice. So I'm going to read a couple of poems that are in my book that kind of speak to, in a tangential way, environmental concerns. So what we have in Brooklyn are these parakeets. The story goes that there was a shipping container of them coming from South America that burst open somehow, and the parakeets all escaped. And these animals that were being brought for sale in North America managed to escape and repatriate all over Brooklyn, and you see them still today. These livid, bright birds who managed to survive for decades. Deleuze and Guattari. Making love is not just becoming as one or even two, but becoming as 100,000. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that was the title. Raise your eyes along the spires of Greenwood Cemetery, or stand on the ball fields of Brooklyn College in Hopperesque light. Quaker parrots will appear to you like the visions of St. Francis, lift the snatches of sound woven to make their voices, and call to you from their nests, a nation of cheer trumpets and conch shells, a frenzied population of twitching toes. They seduce us not simply with their tropical verve. Listen into the feathered shrubbery of their heat, their chattering lines from Emma Lazarus, their trading fours on salt peanuts, their mourning their cousin, the Carolina parrot, reduced to a flourish on ladies' headgear. Who flushed them from their ancestral skies of Argentina? What love sustained the awareness of their bodies, whether as chattel or deportees? Such distance. And who speaks for this diaspora, heedless of empire's mundane cartography? If we ask why Brooklyn, we hear only our own reply. If not here, where? Then tease a final query from our minds, like thread from a lawn chair, parroting Hillel. And if not now, when? A few years ago in Brooklyn, we had, quite tragically, there was a young whale that had gotten trapped in one of the inlets. And, like one follows a sports team, I imagine many people, me and my neighbors, became attached to the fate of this whale. Did not end well, unfortunately. This one begins with an epigraph as well. Epicurus. The honor paid to a wise man is itself a great good for those who honor him. Sam Cooke reminds you how Old Man River just keeps rolling, and you begin to wonder what makes a river tick. So you go sit on Union Street Bridge to study the unruffled Gowanus Canal with its tempting reflections, and perfect your knack for reading water's ohm through the clockwork of the air. And you think, it's like you, which is not much of a river, but wise enough water to hush your regrets for the bloated casualties of your myriad indiscretions, since the first African was made to scoop the marsh to irrigate Dutch farms, until this moment when you see you are that African, and you are the Gowanus, just as you are the baby whale, lost and barging so far along the canal you are blessed now and breaking, and love this one the Daily News will name Sludgy, whom you will birth still upon your bay at Red Hook after the sewer spills a glum baptismal across his fontanelle, and children will stand around and amen the Coast Guard atop the fly-flecked carcass, preaching that wisdom bends light into the eye of the whale, where if you look close, children, you'll find the water bears a flower, and that flower bears your name. So I wanted to share a poem, at least one poem, from my first book. Excuse me a second. This is titled Double Dutch. The girls turning double dutch bob and weave like boxers, pulling punches, shadowing each other, sparring across the slack cord, casting parabolas in the air. They whip quick as an infant's pulse, and the jumper, before she enters the winking, nods in time as if she has a notion to share, waiting her chance to speak. But she's anticipating the upbeat, like a band leader counting off the tune they are about to swing into. The jumper stair steps into mid-air as if she's jumping rope in low gravity, training for a lunar mission. Airborne a moment long enough to fit a second thought in, she looks caught in the mouth bones of a fish as she flutter floats into motion like a figure in a stack of time-lapse photos thumbed alive. Once inside, the bells tied to her shoestrings rouse the gods who've lain in the dust since the Dutch acquired Manhattan. How she dances patterns like a dust-heavy bee retracing its travels in scale before the hive. How the whole stunning contraption of girl and rope slaps and scoots like a paddle boat. Her misted skin arranges the light with each adjustment and flex, now heather-hued, now sheen, light listing on the fulcrum of a wrist and the bare jutted joints of elbow and knee and the faceted surfaces of muscle, surfaces fracturing and reforming like a sun-tickled sleeve of running water. She makes jewelry of herself and garlands the ground with shadows. So just a few more. I was thinking about, sort of this self-mythologizing. If I had a personal myth, what would it be? And it occurs to me that my personal myth would be a collage of images stitched together out of so many books that I've read and identified with. This is called Written by Himself, and it has an anaphora, which is I was born, and those are the same three words that begin every slave narrative. Not that I consider myself, well, that's neither here nor there. Written by himself. I was born in minutes, in a roadside kitchen, a skillet whispering my name. I was born to rainwater and lie. I was born across the river, where I was borrowed with clothespins, a harrow tooth, broadside sewn in my shoes. I returned, though it please you, through no fault of my own, pockets filled with coffee grounds and eggshells. I was born still and superstitious. I bore an unexpected burden. I gave birth, I gave blessing, I gave rise to suspicion. I was born abandoned outdoors in the heat-shaped air drifting like spirits in old windows. I was born a fraction and a cipher and a ledger entry. I was an index of first lines when I was born. I was born waist deep, stubborn in the water, crying, ain't I a woman and a brother? I was born to this hall of mirrors, this horror story. I was born with a prologue of references, pursued by mosquitoes and thieves. I was born passing off the problem of the 20th century. I was born. I read minds before I could read fishes and loaves. I walked a piece of the way alone before I was born. And so here's, I was thinking about paternalism, the patriarchy, and how so many social ills can be traced directly back to that one little flaw in civilization. This is from a series. It's called Problema 4. At 13, I asked my father for a tattoo. I might as well have asked for a bar mitzvah. He said I had no right to alter the body he gave me. Aping what little of Marx I learned from the sisters down the street who wore torn black stockings with Doc Martens, I said I was a man because I could claim my body and the value of its labor. This meant I could adorn it or dispose of it as I chose. Tattoos, my father said, are like children. Have one, you'll want another. I knew there was a connection between the decorated body and reproduction. This was why I wanted a tattoo. Yet I reasoned, not in so many words. His analogy only held in the case of possession, i.e., I possess my body, but cannot possess my children. His laughter was my first lesson in the human Ponzi scheme of paternalism, the self-electing indenture to the promise of material inheritance, men claiming a hollow authority because, simply, their fathers had claimed a hollow authority. Knowing I had little idea as to what my proposed tattoo might resemble, my father sent me to my room to sketch it using the pastels he had given me for Christmas. Based on his critique, he said, he would consider my request. But he had already taken the shine from my swagger. How can I beautify what I do not possess and call it anything but graffiti? Now, Chris Rock says, my first job is to keep my daughter off the pole. Whether or not I agree with him, I get his point. As a father myself, I now see every mutinous claim of independence as the first steps toward my sweet peas falling in with a bad crowd. Richard Pryor says, we are bound to fuck up our kids one way or another. My father would split the difference. I made you, he'd say. I can unmake you and make another one just like you. And I'll wrap up with a poem called Wishing Well. Thanks again. Wishing Well. Outside the Met, a man walks up, sun tweaking the brim sticker on his starter cap, and he says, pardon me, old school, he says, you know, is this a wishing well? Yeah, son, I say sideways over my shrug. Throw your bread on the water. I tighten my chest, wheezy as Rockaway beach sand with a pull of faux smoke from my e-cig to cozy the truculence I hotbox alone, and I am at the museum because it is not a bar. Because he appears not to have changed them in days. I eye the heel-chewed hems of his pants and think probably he will ask me for 50 cents any minute now. Wait for it. A smoke or something. Central Park displays the frisking transparency of autumn. Tracing paper sky, leaves like eraser crumbs gum the pavement. As if deciphering celestial script, I squint and purse off toward the roofline of the museum aloof as he fists 2 pennies from his pocket, mumbling, and then aloud, my man, he says, hey, my man, I'm going to make a wish for you too. I'm laughing now, so what, do you want me to sign a waiver? He laughs along, ain't say all that, he says, but you do have to hold my hand. And close your eyes. I make a starless night of my face before he asks, are you ready? Yeah, dog, I'm ready. Sure, let's do this. His rough hand in mine inflates like a blood pressure cuff, and I squeeze back as if we are about to step together from the sill of all resentment and timeless toward the dream source of unneeding. The two of us hurtle, sharing the cosmic breast of plenitude, when I hear the coins blink against the surface and I cough up daylight. Like I've just been dragged ashore. See now, you'll never walk alone, he jokes, and is about to hand me back to the day he found me in, like I was a rubber duck. And he says, you got to let go. But I feel bottomless, and I know he means well, though I don't believe, and I feel myself shaking my head no, when he means let go his hand. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gregory. That's beautiful. Self-mythologizing, that's a great way to introduce this next portion of the program for the next 15 minutes or so. We're going to be taking questions from the listeners, but I immediately was drawn to the idea of self-mythologizing and the idea of identity poetry, which is one of the ways that Selina's work was described in her bio. So the relationship for both of you, the relationship, if there is one, or the contrast between self-mythologizing and identity, writing identity. Can you make that distinction for me, either of you?
Well, the way I distinguish it is, and I'm not going to win any fans over this, but my sense of identity is, in some ways, an obsolete concept. And identity is the way that we talk about the notions of who we are that are projected onto us. The ones like the sense of essence that we did not choose. Self-mythologizing, at least in the way that I'm thinking about it, is a counter to that. It says I may very well choose many aspects of the identity that is projected onto me, but I am the agent of that that character, that production, and it is a production. So for me, identity is an old way, and it doesn't serve because it carries with it a kind of unchangeable baggage.
Right, and there's a matter of ownership and control.
Right, yeah.
So, Selina, what's your take on that subject?
Well, I think for me, it's about almost changing the narrative in the kind of subjects that I speak about. So I think it's really interesting, this idea of, this projected identity, and so there may be things expected to speak about or in a certain way, and I think not only in the poems that I write, but the way in which I write them, I kind of hope to disrupt that in a way. And I think for me, this idea of identity and lots of things that I write about, like home and belonging, I think become now more than ever very, very charged, very, very emotive. Who gets to call the space home? Particularly when we think about migration, it's very, very politicized. So I feel that I use language and the things I write about to kind of reimagine that and also challenge that, I suppose.
Oh, very interesting. What I hear you asking and mentioning there is there's a relationship between identity and what a person calls home as well. You made that very interesting transition and leap for me, which leads to a question that's from one of our listeners today about the idea of homecoming and diaspora, the diasporic experience, which was alluded to at the beginning of the show. Gregory mentioned it. How that fits in, the idea of the diaspora and homecoming. Is this a means of remembering? Is it a means of destination or reconciliation? What is it that's going on there when you look at homecoming and the diaspora?
Well, so the diaspora is an imagined space, right? It is a history that we imagine sharing. And it, in the absence of other forms of bonding, I think and in the absence of geographic locations, sort of the tangible places to call home, we look to the concept of diaspora as a way of both reaching out to others and reassuring ourselves that we are not alone in the grand scheme. And homecoming, as I alluded to in the poem, the Brooklyn poem, one of the Brooklyn poems, is an always shifting concept.
Especially in Brooklyn.
especially in Brooklyn, as we chatted briefly before coming on air. You know, Brooklyn is changing beneath my feet every day that I step out. You know, and who, and I think Selina was gesturing toward this idea: who owns this space? Who gets to call this home? And it's interesting in the way that Brooklyn, no one gets to call Brooklyn home, right? Although there are these rich histories that demand to be respected and acknowledged, but nobody's got their feet firmly planted in that ground. So it's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah. If I can reframe this question slightly for you, Selina, the idea of geographies. There's physical geography, but there's also, as Gregory mentioned, imagined geographies. There's communities of association, whether it's the community of poetry, it's the community of the diaspora, or one or another. You know, which are the ones that matter to you, and in your context in London, where you're in London?
I'm not sure really, and I think maybe that's what I try to kind of have some clarity, or try to at least explore through my work. I mean, I think, you know, particularly in one of the poems that I read out today, Homecoming, I mentioned this idea of falling between the gaps. So I feel like, you know, that I feel that geographically, I suppose, but also within other communities in London, in terms of, you know, I'm involved in many different kinds of communities, and that's a great thing. But sometimes you kind of fall between the gaps of that. And I suppose for me, writing is an attempt to maybe bridge them together, and to, you know, I think to reimagine and recreate something where there might be a loss, to try and kind of recreate something. But I mean, I think it's a thing that's always shifting, and something that, you know, I'm never 100% sure of, which could be both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But I think it's,
you use the word gap in
my writing.
Yeah. It's interesting you use the word gap and fitting in. And I just want to do a follow-up before we go to a question from County Kerry, Ireland. And it's the idea, as we as poets, do you see yourself as having a role as a maker of community?
Oh, that's a big role. No, not really. I'm not sure a maker of one. But an active participant of one, I suppose. But yeah, I'm not sure I'd consider myself quite a maker of community.
Gregory?
I consider myself an imaginer of of community. In my writing process, one of the approaches that I have I turn to repeatedly is imagining the reader that to whom few poems are written, and because I feel like I've always been, you know, in my own head, I feel like I've always been that poet. I'm always overhearing, you know, the poem is a conversation between the poet and someone else, and I get some sort of you know, as I say, tangential access to the poem. And so as I'm writing, I'm imagining that reader who may otherwise have been left out of literary conversations previously. And in that sense, I mean, I agree with Selina. It's a huge and rather egotistical, I think, thing to believe that one actually produces community, but it is fun and liberating to me as a writer, imagining that that I am in service of that effort.
Yeah. Well, the creation of community can be a service, not
sure.
not a Donald Trump egomaniacal moment. So anyway, I do want to turn to this very interesting question from Victoria Kennefick in County Kerry, Ireland. And it really pertains to both of you, because Selina, you did mention your relationship briefly to language, or the use of language. And here's, I think you can read along with me. Victoria asks, you said, Gregory that you try to lampoon academic language. I'm not sure where she found that, and you can tell us where, but yet it's a language that you speak, she says. So how does this, and your being an academic, impact your work?
Well, actually, back speaking to this concept of community and my sense that I've always been on, sort of marginal to, and it's not true. I want to emphasize that it's not a fact. It is a function of my own insecurities, and I'm well aware of that. But nonetheless, I have felt myself marginalized in academic settings, despite the fact that I'm drawn to academic settings more than any other setting. And so in that sense of marginalization, I'm like the bad kid at the back of the classroom, sort of throwing spitballs, but secretly being very fascinated with the lecture and wanting desperately to be let in on the conversation.
Right.
So I kind of get a kick out of adopting the high-flown, highbrow academic language, and as I say, lampooning it. But then I have to admit that my dirty little secret is in the off hours I use that language rather consistently. I resort to that language quite a bit. Yeah. So I am poking fun. I am pretending to be someone who can poke fun at the thing that I actually am. Yes. If that makes sense.
Let's face it, language is a majestic thing, but we're also, as individuals, somewhat need to establish our distance from it so we're not slaves to it.
Sure, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Selina, what are you thinking about this relationship to language?
Well, I think for me, a lot of the things that I write about, it aims. Well, firstly, I try and be as accessible as I can be, but I think in my work I try and kind of disrupt mainstream narrative in a similar way to Gregory, but maybe in a different way slightly. So some of the poems I write on migration, for example, immigration, is in an attempt to move beyond the kind of reductive scaremongering that is populated throughout mainstream media, for example. So for me, it is creating more of a nuanced narrative, nuanced language, and being very mindful of that. And that's where I feel like poetry and creative writing has its power in a way, because you can counter some of the kind of really reductive, quite infantile descriptions that we're kind of being drowned in, really. So for me, that's kind of the power of language and the ways in which I try and write.
That's very much it sounds like Asian martial arts, where you're using the force of the language against itself or something. So, very interesting. This is funny because in a way this is sort of like one of these dating game show things, and I'm the host, and you two are on a blind date, and I'm sitting here at the table between you. So I think we have time, and Robert suggested that if you have anything you want to ask each other, I would step out away from the table so you can take a moment and ask each other a question. So now's your opportunity to do that.
Well, I am curious, Selina, if you feel, as the poet laureate of London, if you feel that your work is representative of something uniquely or perhaps quintessentially London-ish.
Yes and no, really. I'm not, I wasn't born in London. I came to London about 5 years ago, but I think there's something about me representing the transitory nature of
Yeah.
London and deciding to kind of make that a home, which is very, very reflective of London. And, you know, most people that I meet aren't from London, but have somehow found themselves there and, are making it a home. So I feel in that way, very, very much so, getting beyond the kind of initial feeling like a fraud because I'm not a Londoner in terms of being born in London.
Mm.
Actually, I have struggled in London, moved house several times, transport. It's like a kind of code, I think, between Londoners to talk about your journey home and which night bus you're getting and all the rest of it. Things like that, the kind of language, or almost like the currency of London and living in London. I think I feel very fluent in. So in that sense, I do. But yeah, I'm quite new in the role, so it's something that I'm kind of growing into and kind of finding out. I think, yeah. I guess for me, I'm wondering, kind of what's next for you.
Well, yeah. So how do you? What's the next act? Um,
Mm.
I had been uh, interestingly to me, if no one else, I had already begun work on a collection of essays.
Oh, great.
My father was an air traffic controller in 1981 when all the controllers went on strike, and rather than negotiate with the union, President Reagan at the time fired them all, 13,000 federal employees. And so and Thatcher was prime minister at the time, and she took some notes on union busting from Reagan. And I've been interested in that moment as this kind of rippling, this kind of ground zero, if you will, of the decline um, um, of labor, organized labor across the globe.
Mm.
And thinking about the personal impact on my life, and so I've been working on these essays that kind of reflect on all these radiating ideas that are around class mobility, education, um, community. What is a union if not a community? Uh, So I had actually been really invested in that project, uh, and when I signed the this book digest with Four Way Books, my publisher, it was 2 years before the book was published. So it had it had very much receded to the back of my mind by the time it actually came out. Um, yeah, so I had moved on
Mm.
long before the book even was published.
Well, this is it. We had a full hour, and it was fascinating, really. I wish we could go on another hour. I think you guys could probably talk here for another hour very easily. But this is our allotted time, so on behalf of the Walt Birthplace, my name is George Wallace. I want to thank Selina Nwulu and Gregory Pardlo for being part of this show, and I want to thank Robert Peake for allowing us to be part of this very fine transatlantic poetry program. I'll turn it back to you, Robert. Thanks so much.
Thank you, George. George, that was wonderful, and thanks for hosting. Thanks to both of you. It was just tremendous poetry, fascinating discussion. And I just want to remind our audience now that if any of this spoke to you as much as it has to me listening in, be sure to seek out their books, find them. There's still time before Christmas. I'm sure you could think of at least one person who would like a poetry book for one or both of these tremendous poets. So just in concluding the evening tonight, I want to let you know about our next bit of a special event on Saturday the 30th of January 2016, next year. We'll be hosting our hosts. So George Wallace here are wonderful poets in their own right, which is how they support us in finding other interesting poets, in asking them interesting questions during the Q&A. And this is an opportunity to actually hear the poetry of some of these wonderful hosts. So Saturday, the 30th of January, do be sure to tune in, and note the slightly different time. That'll be 7 p.m. Here in the UK, 2 p.m. on the East Coast, and 11 a.m. on the West Coast. So do check that out. Just again, remains with me to say thank you to all of you tuning in. Thank you, in a heartfelt way, to our poets. It was been just tremendous to hear your work, and thanks to George and to the Walt Whitman Birthplace to making this possible. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you again in January. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.